The air backstage was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. It was 1965, and the Long Beach International Karate Championships had just concluded its evening demonstrations. Bruce Lee had finished his now legendary two-finger push-up display, and the crowd was still buzzing with disbelief. But what happened in the next 9 seconds would never make it to any official record, never be captured on film, and yet would ripple through martial arts circles for decades to come. Bruce was wiping sweat from his face with a white towel when the door to the makeshift dressing area swung open. The man who entered wasn't there to congratulate him. His name was Jack Thornton, though most people just called him Thorn. He stood 6'4", weighed 350 pounds, and had spent the last 8 years working as private security for some of the wealthiest and most paranoid men in Los Angeles. Thorn had a reputation. He didn't just look intimidating. He had put men in hospitals. Plural. And he had never once faced legal consequences because the men he hurt were always the ones who started it. At least that's what the paperwork said. Thorn moved through the narrow backstage corridor with surprising quietness for a man his size. Other martial artists instinctively stepped aside. Bruce was standing near a folding table cluttered with gym bags and water bottles. He was 24 years old, weighed 140 pounds soaking wet, and was still relatively unknown outside of martial arts demonstrations and a few television appearances. He looked up as Thorn approached, and his expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. What most people didn't know was that this confrontation had been brewing for weeks. Thorn's employer, a real estate developer named Clayton Morris, had been in negotiations to fund a chain of martial arts schools. Morris had approached several high-profile instructors, including a traditional kung fu master named Sifu Liang, who had been teaching in San Francisco's Chinatown for over 30 years. Sifu Liang was old school. He believed in secrecy, in keeping techniques within the Chinese community, in traditions that stretched back centuries. And then Bruce Lee came along, teaching anyone who wanted to learn, breaking down the walls, declaring that style didn't matter, that truth in combat had no nationality. Sifu Liang saw Bruce as a traitor. Morris saw an opportunity to play both sides. He told Liang he'd fund his schools if someone could publicly prove that Bruce's methods were nothing but flashy showmanship. Liang didn't want to dirty his own hands, but he had students. And those students had connections. One of those connections was Thorn, who had trained in traditional kung fu for 2 years before his teacher told him he was too aggressive, too dangerous, and asked him to leave. Thorn never forgot that rejection. And he never stopped training, adapting what he learned into something far more brutal. So when Thorn was told that Bruce Lee was disrespecting the old ways, embarrassing traditional masters, making a mockery of real kung fu, he didn't need much convincing. He had watched Bruce's demonstration that night with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. He saw the speed. He saw the crowd's reaction. And he saw what he believed was arrogance. Now, standing 3 feet away from Bruce, Thorn spoke. His voice was low, almost conversational. He said Bruce's demonstration was impressive for the cameras but wouldn't mean anything in a real situation. He said that traditional martial artists had spent lifetimes perfecting techniques that Bruce was dismissing after a few years of training. He said that if Bruce really believed his philosophy, he should be willing to test it right now, without referees, without rules, without witnesses who would turn it into a spectacle. Bruce set the towel down. He didn't raise his voice. He asked Thorn if this was a challenge or a conversation. Thorn smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly. He said it was whatever Bruce wanted it to be, but that if Bruce walked away, people would know. Not the crowd. Not the reporters. But the people who mattered. The traditional masters. The ones who had been whispering that Bruce was all talk. There were 4 other people in that backstage area. 2 martial artists who had competed earlier in the day, 1 event organizer, and a stagehand. All 4 of them would later give similar accounts of what happened next, though none of them would speak about it publicly for years. Some out of respect. Some out of fear. Some because they simply couldn't find the words. Bruce didn't respond verbally. He shifted his weight slightly, barely noticeable, and his eyes